Phantom Pain. Alpha Mated Book 4, A Werewolf Shifter Romance. Written by Flynn. 1. Today would be the day. I would do it. I would go out into the world a free woman, and chain myself to the shackles of office work. Today was Tuesday. And it would be gloriously boring, and free from paranormal stuff. But why? David persisted, as he followed me down the stairs like a lost puppy. He was robed in his robe and some fuzzy bunny slippers I don't ever recall seeing before. A predator dressed in the stuffed imitation of their kill had a certain hilarious irony to it, but this morning, I wasn't laughing. No, this morning I was dressed to kill a day's worth of office work. We reached the front doors. I spun around to face him with a frown. I told you I've missed a day of work already, so I'm going today. I set my hand on the knob. A jolt of something cold flowed over me. I shuddered. David frowned. Is something wrong? I shook my head and smiled at him. No. I pursed my lips and furrowed my brow. I don't know. It felt like somebody splashed cold water on my soul. David frowned and set his hands on my shoulders. I'd much rather you stay here with me. I snorted and removed his hands. And grow fat and have 12 children. He grinned and leaned down to peck a kiss on my lips. Is that so bad? I pushed him away and smiled softly at him. Babies later, work now. I'll see you after 5. I hurried on my way to work in my ancient machine that was once called a car. Now it was more like several thousand pieces of metal that were kept together with rust, and might take me from point A to point B. I didn't remember the tracking device issue, until I stopped at the same intersection where Latro had kidnapped me. I swept my eyes over the area, but didn't spot anything out of the ordinary. Pure had probably put it in the gas tank, or some other place I couldn't get to. Sneaky butler. This day I made it safely to work and plopped myself down in my chair. I leaned back and breathed a sigh. The cold jolt from that morning still lingered with me, but I took solace in the normalcy of the office building. There were no vampire vexations, no witch worries, no paranormal problems here. Just me and my paperwork. And Ruth. Her head popped over our dividing wall, and she had a big grin on her face. Hey! I started and nearly fell out of my chair. The only thing that kept me in my seat was the desk which my knees hit on their way to the stratosphere. Damn it! I hissed as I clutched at my throbbing knobs of sinew and bone. Ruth winced and half hid herself behind the wall. Sorry. I sighed and shook my head. It's fine. The pain will wear off sometime next year. She slunk further down. I really am sorry. My eyes flickered to her, and I arched an eyebrow. Ruth never apologized twice, at least not in a row. Something up. Her head disappeared out of sight, and her muffled voice floated through the wall. It's fine. I'm just a little tired. I frowned and stood. A quick peek around the corner of the shared wall showed my friend seated in her chair with her back turned to the doorway. She slouched. Ruth didn't slouch except when she was disappointed. I walked over to stand beside her. Her face was a little pale, and she clutched her hand on her chest over where her heart lay. I knelt beside her and set my hand on her free hand. Ruth gave me a ghost of a smile. Don't look at me like that. I'm not dying. I just haven't really felt that well since Friday. When you had your date with what's his name? I asked her. Her smile widened and she sighed. Mr. Douglas Gardy, but he says to call him Doug. I patted her hand. That's nice, but about you looking like your death warmed over. Did you catch something at a restaurant? Have you seen a doctor? She laughed and waved her hand at me. I'm not that bad, silly, and we didn't go to a restaurant. We went clubbing all night long. I pursed my lips as I studied her face. There were circles under her eyes and her skin felt clammy.
I smiled up at her. Must be a hell of a guy.
She nodded and gazed off into the distance of her flying toaster screensaver.
Yeah.
I only get to see him at night because he works all day, but he's handsome, strong, and a good kisser.
You'll have to introduce us sometime, but during the day, how about I treat you to a nice hot lunch? I suggested.
Ruth's eyes widened and sparkled. I cringed. I'd seen that look just before she gave me her work last Friday.
That'd be great.
We could get somebody for you, and have a double date. I cringed.
I'm not sure that's such a good idea. She jumped to her feet. Of course it is.
We can get together tomorrow night.
That sounds like a great idea.
My eyes widened. That voice. I whipped my head around and looked over my shoulder. David's head popped into the doorway of Ruth's cubicle. The mischievous twinkle in his eyes and the sly grin on his delicious lips made me want to kiss him and kill him. Ruth's eyes widened and a squeal escaped her trembling lips.
Mr. Dives.
He chuckled at her exuberance and my scowl, and stepped into Ruth's square.
A double date would be great.
Ruth blinked at him.
Why you want to go on a date with one of us? He nodded. I'd be honored to take one of you lovely ladies on a date.
His eyes fell on me and his smile widened.
You seem to be the odd woman out in this match, lovely young woman.
Would you care to accompany this old man on a date?
I tried to block out images of throttling my mate. It didn't work.
Instead, I slapped a tense smile on my lips and nodded.
I guess I can go for that.
David smiled and bowed his head.
Then it's a date, miss. I held out my hand. Miss Dakota Combes.
And you are? Ruth rattled my shoulders with her hands and leaned close to my ear.
You know who he is. I shrugged. Actually, no. He looks like a hobo in a suit.
Ruth's face grew paler and her words were more tense.
He's
David Dives, professional hobo, David finished for her. He took my hand and gave it a good shake that left my fingers ringing.
At your service. I stood and looped my arm through his. Actually, I was looking to get advice on tramping. If you could step this way, we can talk.
Ruth's jaw dropped open and her eyes widened as she watched us stride from the cubicle. I directed David not to my own little square sphere, but to the supply closet in one corner of the floor.
I tossed him in, shut the door, flicked on the light and glared at him. What are you doing here?
I growled. He sat atop a couple of boxes of printing paper and shrugged.
Only inspecting my company.
A billionaire playboy can do that.
I crossed my arms and arched an eyebrow. After ignoring your company for so long, you're now interested in visiting it more than once a year. I had some encouragement, he admitted.
My face fell and I narrowed my eyes.
You followed me here to stalk me, didn't you? He wagged his eyebrows. Perhaps.
I pulled David from his ream seat, spun him so he faced the door, and gave him a good shove.
Out.
He stumbled to the door and set his hand on the knob before he turned to me with that mischievous grin.
Of the closet or the building? I snapped a finger at the door. Both, and we'll talk about this later. He chuckled and bowed his head. I look forward to it.
2. David left, and I returned to my cubicle. I found Ruth seated in my chair with her arms folded across her chest.
I stopped in the doorway and frowned. What?
She arched an eyebrow and tapped the floor with the toe of one shoe.
You know what?
I plopped down in my spare chair and frowned.
No what?
She stopped her tapping and leaned forward towards me. Her narrowed eyes studied my face.
Where were you yesterday? On my deathbed, why? Was the doctor who revived you cute? I closed my eyes and rubbed the bridge of my nose. And annoying. He didn't happen to be a certain billionaire we both know, would he?
I dropped my hand to my side and sighed.
Fine, you've got me.
I've been dating the guy since Friday.
Her eyes widened. As in last Friday.
When I asked you to take care of my stuff for me. I nodded.
That's how we met, on the elevator going down.
Ruth squealed and clapped her hands. Cupid wins again.
I blinked at her. Come again. She gestured to herself. Me as matchmaker, silly. I wanted to get you a guy, and I did. And what a catch. I glanced at my watch and frowned. And do I have a few choice words for my choice catch?
I spent the rest of the long, not relaxing day alternating between fending off questions from my friend and worrying about same said friend. Her perky attitude belied some darker problem that she either wouldn't admit or wasn't aware of. That night, we left together and rode the elevator down to the garage. We were the only ones on that trip down. My eyes flickered over to her.
She was pale again.
Ruth winked back at me.
You don't have to worry. I won't tell anyone about your sugar daddy. I'm worried about you, I told her.
She grinned and shrugged.
I'll be okay. It's probably just a cold or something. That time of year, you know.
The elevator reached the subterranean garage. We stepped out and Ruth spun around to face me.
That's when she collapsed.
Ruth! I yelled. I caught her before she hit the ground and lowered her to the cool pavement. Her body felt cold and her eyes were rolled back so I could see the whites.
I shook my friend. Ruth!
Ruth, can you hear me?
Her jaw dropped open.
A faint white mist floated out of her mouth. I started back and watched the bulbous body of the mist curl up a foot out of her mouth while its tapering tail lingered deep within Ruth. I nearly choked on my words.
What the hell?
Ruth shifted in my arms. The white mist drew itself back into her body through her mouth. Ruth's eyes rolled back to their rightful position, but she didn't respond to me.
I leaned down and shook her. Ruth!
Ruth, can you hear me? It was just after 5, so there were dozens of people still in the garage. Many rushed over to us, and some of them pulled out their phones. It was a few minutes later that the ambulance arrived. I grabbed her dropped purse and climbed into the back of the vehicle for the trip to the hospital.
The doctor had me sit in the hall outside the emergency room. That was where I received the call.
I glanced down at my phone and read the name. I pursed my lips and put the phone to my ear.
I didn't put your number in my phone. I had Pure do it while you weren't looking, but where are you?
David questioned me. My eyes flickered to the white doors of the emergency room.
At the hospital.
His panicked voice made me cringe.
What? Are you hurt? What happened? I'm not the one in the hospital, my friend Ruth is, I told him. She collapsed in the garage. I think you might want to come down here and look at her.
I could just imagine his cute furrowed brow.
Me?
Why? Because one of the swinging doors to the emergency room opened.
The doctor stepped out.
His eyes fell on me, and he gestured to me.
I gotta go. Wait, I cancelled the call and stood.
My heart skipped several beats.
I felt my lips dry out. Is she all right? The doctor smiled and nodded. She'll be fine. It was only a slight attack of anemia. I blinked at him. That was the last disease I expected from my rambunctious friend.
Anemia.
How? He shrugged. Sometimes these things just happen, but she wishes to see you.
We've transferred her to a separate room for observation, but she should be able to leave in an hour or so. He led me a few doors down the hall to a long room filled with beds. Flimsy rods on wheels with curtains provided the only privacy. Ruth lay on one of those white-sheeted beds with the blanket pulled up to her chin. Her pallor wasn't too different from the bleach-white sheet. A nurse stood at her side, and the pair of them talked in low voices. I walked over to her bedside. The nurse turned at my coming and smiled at me.
You must be Dakota.
Ruth's told me so much about you.
I smiled down at my pale friend. I'm sure it's all lies.
Ruth returned my smile. The nurse chuckled.
I'm sure they're not, but I'll leave you two alone for 10 minutes, then Ruth has to rest.
I nodded. The nurse stepped out of the small makeshift room and shut the curtain behind her to give us privacy. I took a seat in a chair close beside Ruth's bed and looked around.
Reminds me of the office, I commented.
Ruth shook her head.
The wallpaper's a lot better. I snorted. But you haven't tried the food yet. She shuddered and looked away. I'm not really that hungry. I furrowed my brow. Is that why you have anemia? Because you haven't been eating.
Ruth pursed her lips but nodded.
Why not?
She closed her eyes and shook her head.
I don't know. I'm just not hungry.
She looked back at me and smiled.
But I promise I'll eat at our double date tomorrow. It's still on, right?
I reached out and squeezed her hand. If it'll get you to eat, I'll have all your meals with you, and I'll drag along David to pay the bill. She smiled and I saw that familiar twinkle in her eyes.
It's a date.
The curtain opened and the nurse stood in the entrance.
It's time. I stood.
My hand reluctantly slipped from Ruth's.
See you in an hour, she told me.
I nodded.
I'll be here.
I left the long white room and went out to the waiting room at the front of the hospital. My butt barely touched the seat when the doors slid open and David hurried in. Pure was close behind but a little more winded. David swept his eyes over the room. His gaze fell on me, and he hurried to occupy the empty seat beside me. He grasped my hands and inspected my personage.
You sure you're all right?
I rolled my eyes and nodded.
I'm here because Ruth collapsed, remember? He pursed his lips. It isn't catching, is it?
I furrowed my brow and glanced down the hall in the direction of her room.
Only if the white mist is contagious.
David arched an eyebrow.
White mist?
I returned my attention to him and gave a nod.
Yeah.
When she was knocked out, a weird mist came out of her mouth and floated a foot over her head.
It kind of looked like a really stretched light bulb.
David's eyes hardened.
And you say this came out of her mouth?
I nodded.
Yeah, why? You think you know what it is? Was it translucent? He persisted. I narrowed my eyes. I could see through most of it, but what's this about? What was it? He shook his head. I'm not sure, but I know someone who can tell us. Kosho.
I guessed.
He shook his head. No.
We don't have anything solid to give to him, and besides, he's not a doctor.
I gestured around us. You're in the right place for one of those. He smiled. I'm not quite meaning the usual kind.
I'm referring to my personal physician, a man by the name of Vincent Ficus.
I arched an eyebrow. Is he a man or does he just fake that?
David chuckled.
You'll see.
Would you like to see him now?
I shook my head. Nope.
You and I have to give a ride to Ruth in an... A ringtone echoed out of Ruth's purse that I still held. I opened the purse and pulled out her phone. The name read Doug. I took a deep breath and answered it.
Hello, Doug. Ruth, a melodious male voice replied. No, this is Dakota, Ruth's friend from the office.
Are you sitting down? I could hear him suck in some air.
Yes, why? What's happened?
Where's Ruth?
She collapsed after work, but she's fine. The doctors said it was just a slight attack of anemia, I assured him. She's still in the hospital, but they'll release her in an hour. Which hospital? I'd like to see her.
I told him, and that ended our conversation. I dropped the phone back into the purse and glanced at David.
The boyfriend's coming.
3. David leaned back in his chair and folded his arms.
Tell me everything you noticed about your friend's illness.
When did it start?
I shrugged. As far as I know, just today, or maybe yesterday.
I'd know better if a certain wolfy man hadn't dragged me around yesterday.
He furrowed his brow. We'll have to catch that wolfy man and scold him, but later.
When was the last time you saw your friend?
Last Friday.
She left at 5 to meet up with the boyfriend, a guy by the name of Douglas Gardy.
And she was healthy then?
I nodded.
As healthy as a horse, and with as much energy. I don't think she's ever used her sick leave. He stroked his chin. How very odd.
His eyes flickered to pure. Could you call Dr. Ficus and ask him how late we can visit him tonight?
Tell him it's for a consultation for a friend.
Pure bowed and left the waiting room.
I arched an eyebrow. So what's so important about seeing this doc? He a vampire or something?
David smiled.
Or something, but he's very knowledgeable in this area. And what is this area we're dealing with?
I persisted. David leaned towards me and lowered his voice, so the women at the front desk couldn't overhear us.
What you described was certainly not normal. I snorted. I don't know. It sounds like it's right up your alley.
The doors opened, and a gentleman stepped into the waiting room. He wore a black overcoat and black shoes. Beneath the coat was a dark blue suit without a tie but clean and pressed to perfection. His bespectacled eyes swept over the room as he swept his broad-brimmed hat off his head.
I straightened. Mr. Gardy. He hurried over to us. Miss Combes, I presume. I smiled and held out my hand. I'm not Livingston.
He returned my smile and shook my hand.
It's a pleasure to finally meet you.
Ruth's told me so much about you. He fingered his hat and glanced around us.
Could I possibly see her?
I stood and dropped our purses onto the seat.
Sure. Just, David coughed into his fist.
I rolled my eyes and gestured to him.
This is Mr. David Dives, my boyfriend.
Gardy turned to David. His face fell a little, but he stiffly bowed to him.
Good evening.
David stood, smiled and returned the bow.
Good evening.
Gardy turned to me.
Now, if you'll show me to Ruth. I swept my arm towards the hallway. This way.
Gardy followed behind me as we clacked our way down the empty white halls. His deep, reverberating voice broke the silence like a knife through butter.
Your friend seemed eager to meet me. I shrugged. David's a little odd.
Gardy arched an eyebrow, but a sly smile played on his lips.
Is he? I hadn't noticed.
We arrived at Ruth's shared room. She was awake, and her eyes lit up when her gaze fell on Gardy.
Doug.
He rushed forward and grasped one of her hands in his.
Ruth. What happened? She smiled and shook her head. I guess I forgot to eat my Wheaties this morning.
He took a seat on the stool and returned her smile.
I suppose this means our date is off for tonight. He shook his head. No. We'll have it right here, and then I'll take you home.
I took that as my cue to leave, and retreated back to the waiting room. David was back in his seat, with a furrowed brow. I plopped myself beside him and sighed.
Looks like we can go any time. Mr. Fancy Pants offered to take her home.
David continued to look straight ahead without speaking. I noticed his cute little nose twitched, so I pinched it between 2 fingers. He started back and pulled himself free from my pincer grip.
Careful on the nostrils. They're delicate instruments, he scolded me. I arched an eyebrow. Why were they instrumenting so fast?
David's face fell, and he glanced in the direction of Ruth's room. Did you notice anything strange about your friend's boyfriend?
I shrugged. Only that he must be rich to be taking her to places in that suit. Nothing else, he persisted. I frowned. Was there something else I was supposed to see? No smell, but you've told me all I needed to know. He stood and offered me his arm. Now, how about we go home and get some rest for ourselves?
I snorted, but accepted his arm and let him pull me up.
I have a feeling rest isn't what you're looking for.
He grinned.
Perhaps not, but it does involve home. And a bed, I added.
David chuckled.
Perhaps, but let's go.
Pure met us by the limo.
Dr. Ficus says he isn't accepting patients or consultations this evening, but would be glad to see you tomorrow in the early afternoon.
David shrugged.
I guess that settles our evening, and tomorrow afternoon.
We had a short detour to pick up my car from the company garage, but in an hour we were both back at the Wolf mansion. Pure prepared a quick bite on a platter, and David picked it up and led me upstairs to our bedroom. He set the food on the foot of the bed, and plucked a piece of thinly sliced ham from the pile of meats. I took a seat beside the food, and watched him pace the floor as he munched away on his delicacy.
You're pacing. My feet are thinking, he quipped. I arched an eyebrow. It's about Ruth's boyfriend, isn't it?
He nodded.
Unfortunately, yes. I can't quite put my finger on the problem, but there was a problem with him.
I fell back atop the covers.
Next, you're going to say he's the reason she has anemia.
David paused and stared straight ahead at a wall. His lips were pursed.
I lifted my head and frowned. You're not going to say that, are you? People just don't give other people anemia. Nor do people have white mist float out of their mouths when they're unconscious, he pointed out. I sat up and shrugged. Maybe it was the lighting in the place.
I should complain to the owner about that dark dungeon he makes us poor employees use, while he sits at home goofing off all day. David turned to me. His mischievous smile slipped onto his delicious lips.
I keep myself busy. I snorted. With what?
David took the platter off the bed, and set it on the vanity. He glanced at me through the mirror, and I noticed his eyes held a tinge of yellow.
With thinking how I can best please you. I frowned and shoved the last of my food into my mouth. You can please me by putting that tray back. He half turned to me and removed his shirt. I think I have a better plan.
My pulse quickened. I scooted to the head of the bed, as he strode over to the foot. There was a noticeable bulge in his pants, and his muscles stretched and expanded.
That familiar scent of lust washed over me.
I breathed deep and shuddered. My body broke out in a thick sweat. I grasped the covers as he crawled onto the bed. My swollen breasts pushed against the front of my tight shirt. My mate reached me and set his hands on either side of me. A feral grin graced his lips as his yellow eyes swept over me. His voice was deep and lustful.
Mine.
He leaned forward and caught my lips in a passionate kiss. One of his hands roamed up my side and cut away the buttons of my shirt. My breasts pushed the shirt open and strained against my bra. His hand cupped one of my breasts, and I groaned as his fingers massaged my luscious mound. He broke our kiss and left a searing trail of more of them down my neck.
I moaned and squirmed.
His hand slipped down and sliced open the side of my jeans. My thick thighs bulged out, and he toyed with the tingling skin. I slipped my back onto the sheets, and he covered himself with me. His hands were everywhere, groping and teasing me. Every tantalizing touch heightened the hot ache inside me. Every slip of his finger against my bare flesh reminded me I was his to dominate, to do with what he pleased, and what pleased him pleased us both. I reveled in his caresses, his wonderful teasing lovemaking. One of his fingers slipped into my underwear. He brushed against my sensitive bundle of nerves. Pleasure shot through my body and made me jump.
I clenched the sheets and shuddered. Oh God, I whispered.
He lifted his head. Those beautiful yellow eyes gazed down at me with a burning light. His lip curled back to reveal sharp fangs and a lustful grin.
Yes, he growled.
He took me then with a wild passion that only lovers can experience.
Our clothes were thrown aside. The time flew by in a passionate haze of lust.
His lips were everywhere, tasting me and loving me.
I arched into his hot mouth even as his hands danced across my trembling flesh.
His hands touched me and teased me, exploring every curve and mound. My body was on fire. My mewing sounds echoed off the walls.
I moaned and panted. Our sweat-soaked bodies rubbed against each other in a terrible friction that heightened our pleasure, yet did not satisfy it.
He took me swiftly and forcefully. Every thrust of his swollen manhood was a shock of pleasure to my trembling body. His grunts filled my ears even as my cries grew to chants of lustful need.
Yes. Oh God, yes. More. Please more. He penetrated me again and again.
My breasts rubbed against his hard chest, sending tingles through my body.
I squirmed and thrashed beneath him.
My body ached for completion, for a finish to this lustful dance that I hungered for yet wished to end. He pushed faster and faster. The world faded, until all I knew was him inside me.
I panted and groaned.
My body strained against his delicious, frenzied lovemaking.
I needed him. I ached for him.
Only he could fulfill this burning desire inside me. Only he could take me and make me his.
Yes. Oh God, yes, I chanted.
I reached up and grasped his head in my hands as he took me with a wild passion.
The tremors of orgasm teased my body. I stroked his hair and moaned. Take me.
Make me yours all night. Again and again. I felt the rushing wave of satisfaction. My eyes widened, but I saw nothing. There was only him and the rising waters of sweet, sensual orgasm.
I leaned my head back and groaned. Oh God.
Faster.
Just a little more. Please take me.
My body twitched and strained.
So close. Yes. Take me. Yes. Yes. Yes.
My orgasm swept me away on its lustful waters. My wet walls clamped down on my mate. He grunted and thrust hard and deep into me, spilling himself deep into me. He collapsed onto the bed beside me. I wiggled into his warm chest and sighed. He wrapped his arms around me, and together we fell into a deep, wonderful sleep. 4. It was a long, fun night, but the next morning I dragged myself from the sheets and slid onto the floor so my face was smushed against the carpet on my side of the bed. My whole body ached and my hair was a mess. The sheets shifted, and a mischievous face peeked over the edge of the bed directly above me.
Going somewhere?
David teased.
I glared at him. No, and it's all thanks to you. He bowed his head.
My pleasure and yours. I rolled my eyes and flipped over so I lay on my shoulder blades.
You're really not helping my career, you know that? He chuckled. Sleeping with the boss isn't helping your career. No, and it's not helping my body either. I clenched my jaws and righted myself to stand on my feet.
A few bones in my back popped, along with an ankle, knee, and something in my hip.
If this keeps up, I'm going to fall apart. He sat up.
The sheets pulled around his waist and lap, and tempted me to pull them away.
You should rest in bed. I snorted. I don't think I'm going to find any rest in your bed, so I may as well go to work and get some sleep at my computer.
I grabbed my clothes and strode to the closet.
Besides, aren't you forgetting something?
David watched me like a hawk watches its prey.
I don't have to remember anything but you, my mate. I flung on some clothes and sighed.
You have your appointment with your mysterious doctor this afternoon, and I have to see how Ruth made it home last night. David's humor fled and he pursed his lips.
I haven't forgotten, but there's something I want you to do for me.
I paused and turned to him with an arched brow.
What's that? He caught my gaze and kept it. I don't want you to be alone with Ruth's boyfriend. I snorted and turned away. Jealousy doesn't suit you. I heard him slip off the bed and walk over to me.
He set his hands on my shoulders and leaned his lips close to my ear.
This isn't about jealousy. There's something wrong with him, and I don't want you alone with him until I figure out what. I patted his hand and sighed. All right, if it makes you feel any better, I won't.
Anyway, I'll see you later. I grabbed a bite to eat off the platter of overnight food and drove to work. I passed by the entrance to Ruth's cubicle.
Her chair was empty.
I plopped down in my own seat and pursed my lips. The minutes ticked down to time.
She didn't come.
I pulled out my phone and dialed her number. A groggy voice answered the ring.
Hello.
I blinked and pulled the phone away from my ear.
The number was definitely Ruth's.
I put the phone back to my ear.
Ruth. Hey Dakota. What are you doing up this early? I furrowed my brow. Early.
Work started a few minutes ago. Ruth groaned, and I heard a creak of a bed. Could you tell the fat guy that I won't be in today?
I'm just not feeling myself. I pursed my lips but nodded. Sure thing, and I'll come by during lunch to see you. She snorted. You'd never make it here and back at noon traffic. Then I'll see you after work, I promised. Sounds like a date.
Anyway, I gotta go do stuff, I guess.
You have to go eat, I reminded her. She chuckled. Sure thing, boss.
Anyway, bye.
Bye. I hung up the phone.
My worries were only amplified. I leaned back in my seat and ruminated over my friend's ill-sounding voice and absence. This was her first leave in all the 3 years she'd worked with me. The rest of the day was one big rumination until the afternoon. My first hint that something was awry came in the sounds of suppressed squeals.
I peeked over the top of my cubicle.
My face fell. A large crowd of women stood at the elevator doors. Above their heads towered my mate, but nothing towered over the sounds of the women's adulations.
Mr. Dives, what a pleasure to see you. Can I have your autograph? Are you still single?
He raised his hands and smiled at his adoring admirers.
One question at a time, ladies, one at a time. I frowned and lowered myself back into my chair.
The excited squeals came closer. They headed down the hall that ran past my square living space. I leaned out the doorway of my cubicle. David strode down the hall with his groupie herd close at his heels. I ducked back into my cubicle and prayed he was just passing through.
The gods were not kind to me.
David stopped at my cubicle and leaned his shoulder against the frame. Behind him lurked the shadows of my co-workers, now transformed into greedy phantoms.
He smiled at me. I glared at him. Ready. My scowl deepened. Ready for what? He chuckled. For your doctor's appointment. Don't tell me you forgot already.
I opened my mouth, but the sound of a great bellowing beast interrupted me.
What's going on here?
Buller's voice boomed. The shadows scattered to the 4 corners of the floor. Buller himself appeared beside David. His eyes widened and a smooth smile slipped onto his lips.
Mr. Dives, what a pleasant surprise. What can I do for you?
David nodded at me.
You can excuse this young woman for the rest of the day. She has a doctor's appointment that she can't miss.
Buller glanced between us and blinked his eyes.
A doctor's appointment, Mr. Dives. But what does that matter to you?
David turned to him and frowned. Buller shrank.
What's important is that it doesn't matter to you, Mr. Buller. Now may she leave?
Buller's head bobbed up and down.
Of course, sir. She can leave immediately.
He glanced at me and his eyes hardened.
You may leave now, Miss Combes. I sighed but picked up my purse and stood.
David stepped aside and swept his arm towards the hall.
I swept past him and strode down the hall.
David followed, and everyone gawked at us as we stepped into the elevator together. My narrowed eyes flickered to David.
Now I know you're trying to get me fired. He smiled and shrugged. I just didn't want you to be late for your appointment. I arched an eyebrow. And what's this about my appointment? It's your doctor. But it's your friend, he countered.
His eyes flickered to me.
By the by, I didn't see her in her cubicle. Did she come in today?
My shoulders sagged.
I ran a hand through my hair and shook my head. No.
I called her, but she sounded like death warmed over. David stared ahead and pursed his lips.
Let's hope that isn't the case.
I whipped my head to him.
What's that supposed to mean? It means I think your friend is in a lot of danger, and the doctor will hopefully tell us what's wrong and how to fix it, he replied. I grabbed his sleeve and forced him to look at me. What kind of danger? What's going on?
David grasped my hand but didn't pull himself free.
He searched my face and sighed. I didn't want to frighten you. Too late. But yesterday when I met you in the waiting room of the hospital, the scent of death lingered on you. I felt the color drain from my face. Then he shook his head.
No, it didn't come from you, but from your close interaction to someone who was suffering, namely your friend.
I felt light-headed.
My hand loosened and I swayed from side to side. David caught me before I collapsed, and leaned me against the rear wall of the elevator.
The doors opened.
We'd arrived at the garage. He pulled me towards the open doors.
Come on. The car is just over here.
Pure waited for us beside the limo, and David helped me into the car. He sat beside me, and Pure pulled the car out of the parking spot. I grasped David's sleeve again and looked into his eyes.
What's going on? He shook his head. I wish I knew, but perhaps the good doctor will know.
5. The good doctor's residence was located on the west side of the river in the bowels of the urban environment. It was a small, unassuming 2-floor house with a green lawn and a garage on the side. Windows near the ground level told me there was a basement, but they were shuttered by thick planks of wood. Pure parked the car on the curb, and David led the way up the stone walk to the front door. There was nothing to show there was a doctor at home, except for a small decal on the front door. It was the pair of serpents entwined around a staff, but the staff looked a little strange. Small sparks flew from the top of the staff, and the serpents looked particularly menacing with red eyes. David knocked on the door. Hurried footsteps came to the entrance, and the door was flung open to reveal a half-crazed maniac with a surgical saw in one hand. His bushy white hair stuck out in all directions, and many of the ends were singed and smoking. He wore a white lab coat with red and purple stains over the front, and his feet were bare. Behind him I glimpsed a living room crowded with tables full of beakers, small cauldrons and Bunsen burners. Grayish liquid bubbled inside the containers, and the steam floated over mounds of papers and stacks of books. Books were strewn about the floor, and abandoned lab coats that were even more grisly in appearance than the one the man wore.
What? He barked.
David smiled and bowed to him.
Your afternoon appointment, Dr. Ficus.
Ficus frowned and leaned forward while squinting his eyes.
Ah.
He straightened and slammed the door in our faces. I glanced at David and jerked my head towards the door.
Are you sure this guy's even competent to stand trial?
David chuckled.
He's a little strange, yes, but that's just what we need for this strange case of your friend's. He knocked. There was the hurried footsteps and the flinging door.
The maniac returned. David grasped the door so it couldn't be shut.
Put on your glasses, doctor, and look at us again.
Ficus rummaged in one of his overcoat pockets and pulled out a pair of tiny spectacles. He put them on his long nose and looked at us. His eyes widened.
David, why didn't you tell me it was you? You didn't give me much of a chance, David pointed out.
Ficus grabbed David's shoulder and pulled him inside with me a few steps behind.
If that's true, then you're getting slow in your old age, David. Now what sort of... I didn't get to hear the rest because he slammed the door in my face.
I rolled my eyes and knocked. Ficus answered the door and glared at me.
Go away.
I'm in conference with a patient. David appeared behind Ficus, and put his hand on the doctor's shoulder.
It's okay, Doc. She's with me.
Ficus frowned, but stepped aside so I could enter.
I do wish you'd tell me these things, David.
I'm too old to play guessing games. I stepped up beside David, and he draped an arm over my shoulder.
I've got a much larger surprise for you, Doc.
I'd like to introduce you to my mate, Miss Dakota Combes. Ficus's eyes widened.
Mate?
Seriously? David nodded.
The doctor slapped his knee with his free hand. It's about time, you slow werewolf. You should have caught that catch years ago.
David shrugged.
Fate is funny that way, but we need your help, Doc.
Ficus nodded at me.
So is she my patient, or do you have some new curse on you that needs removing?
David shook his head.
Neither. The patient is a friend of Dakota's.
A dark shadow descended on Ficus's face.
You know the rules, David. But this is serious, Doc. She really, Ficus shook his head. No patient, no diagnosis, he insisted.
He strode past us into the depths of the living room, to a table where he set down the saw.
I'm not a miracle worker from afar, and even if I was, my crystal ball is broken.
David hurried after him.
But this is serious, Doc. Her life could be in danger.
Ficus shook his head.
Nope. Not doing it.
David pursed his lips and glanced over his shoulder at me. His eyes lit up, and a mischievous smile slipped onto his lips. He whipped his head back to the doctor.
Then how about an early wedding present?
Ficus glanced up from his mess and arched one of his bushy eyebrows.
Wedding present?
Who's getting married? David nodded at me. Dakota and I are getting married.
I blinked at him. Where what?
He rushed to my side and looped his arm around my waist to press me close to his side. A great big goofy smile graced his lips as he turned to the dog.
We're hopelessly in love, Doc, and we're going to be married as soon as we can help out her friend. What do you say?
Don't you want to help the future Mrs. David Dives? Ficus snorted.
Maybe I want to offer her my condolences, but I'll bite on this one, David.
He picked up a pair of long clamps and shook them at David.
But only this once, you hear.
I won't be making these educated guesses for you on a daily basis. David nodded.
That's fine, Doc. Now what do you need to know first?
Ficus tapped his chin with the clamps.
Well, if you want an accurate diagnosis, I'm going to have to know her medical history and the symptoms. She's never missed a day of work in all the years I've known her, I spoke up.
Ficus arched an eyebrow.
Is that it? I shrugged. That's all I know.
Ficus sighed.
Well, I suppose that's a start. Now, about the symptoms. They started yesterday, I began. She was pale and slow, and when we left for work she collapsed in the underground garage.
She was rushed to the hospital in an ambulance, and the doctors said it was anemia. Ficus's eyes flickered to David.
Any puncture marks on the neck?
David shook his head.
No.
Ficus scoffed.
Then I doubt it's anemia, but why do you think there's anything strange about this case? She grow an extra horn or something? She has the smell of death over her, Doc, and Dakota saw something white and filmy try to escape her body through her mouth, David explained.
Ficus's eyes widened.
Now that's a different story altogether. You should have told me that in the first place.
He dropped the clamps and ducked beneath the table to scour the stacks of books.
Is there anybody new in your friend's life, Miss Future Dives?
I raised an eyebrow.
Yes. She has a new boyfriend.
Ficus snatched a book from the bottom of a pile.
The tall stack toppled onto him, but he wiggled himself backwards and turned to us as he sat on the floor. Anything strange about this guy? He has an unusual scent like death, David told him.
Ficus flipped through the pages of the book and absently nodded.
Scent of death on a victim and a close acquaintance. Now that does ring a bell.
He stopped and browsed a few pages.
Aha!
David and I tensed.
What is it? My mate asked him. I finally found that alchemical recipe for quick creation steel I've been looking for a construction friend of mine, Ficus told us.
Our faces fell.
But what about my friend? Oh right, of course.
Ficus flipped through a few pages and stopped near the back. He pressed his finger against the sheet.
Here it is.
Phantom fatigue.
It's slightly rare, but it sounds like what your friend is going through. I frowned. And what's that?
Ficus's eyes flickered over the page and to us.
It means your friend is suffering from the depredations of a phantom.
A malevolent ghost, if you will. Her life is slowly being consumed by the creature, and in a short while she will be in a lot of trouble.
I arched an eyebrow. Seriously? He frowned. Of course I'm sure, at least from the little you gave to me.
All the symptoms are here, except the last one. Scent of death, fatigue to the point of anemia, a new acquaintance.
What's the last symptom? I asked him. Death. I felt the color drain from my face.
David squeezed my side and looked to the doctor.
How can we verify this is true? The doctor clapped the book shut. The only way to be sure that he's a phantom is to purify the guy with fire. I frowned. And if you're wrong?
Ficus climbed to his feet and shrugged.
Then you're going to need an attorney, not a doctor. Isn't there a less dangerous way to find out? I spoke up.
Ficus furrowed his brow and tapped the book against his chin.
Well, you could try to get him into a very bright light, and see if he becomes transparent.
Phantoms hate that. They won't step a foot out in the daytime because of it. I whipped my head to David.
Ruth's boyfriend won't meet her before sunset.
David pursed his lips.
How bright a light does it have to be? The doctor shrugged. Oh, I'd say something like the headlight of a car, or maybe a couple of lamps. And if he is transparent, how would we save her friend?
David asked him. Ficus set the book on the table and rummaged through his pockets.
I have just the thing somewhere in here.
Aha! He pulled out a small vial of purple liquid and walked over to us to hand it to David.
This is what you'd need. It's my catch-all recipe for getting rid of ghosts.
David raised the vial and squished around the contents.
What is it? Holy water mixed with some purple dye so you can see where you're tossing it, Ficus explained. Phantoms hate the stuff more than the light. Just toss some of that stuff onto him, and it'll soil his suit. I arched an eyebrow. His clothes?
Ficus smiled and shook his head.
Not that kind of suit.
Phantoms take over a body that resembles theirs, and tries to revive their soul in that body by sucking the life out of somebody else. I whipped my head to David.
So somebody's actually stuck in that body with the phantom.
David pursed his lips and pocketed the vial.
So it seems.
Ficus nodded at the pocket that held the vial.
Sprinkle enough of that at him, and he should scram. Not enough and well, you've got yourself a mad phantom. What can a mad phantom do? I asked him.
Ficus chuckled.
Plenty, but you don't want to find out. We'll be careful, David promised.
6. Ficus led us to the entrance and opened the door. If I know anything about you, David, then I'll bet you're up to your eyeballs in trouble already, and no amount of my advice will get you out of it. David smiled.
Not quite that. A phone rang. It was mine. I pulled it from my purse and looked at the number.
My eyes flickered up to David.
It's Ruth. I answered the ring. Hey Ruth. Hello, Miss Combes. I frowned.
The voice wasn't Ruth's.
This is Doug.
My pulse quickened.
Where's Ruth? He chuckled. Ruth is just fine, at least for now. I narrowed my eyes. What's that supposed to mean? You might wish to ask your werewolf companion what that means, but I didn't call you to discuss him.
Or rather, I called to discuss both of you.
I'd like to invite you to my house for supper this evening.
My grasp on the phone tightened.
What's going on?
Where's Ruth? Doug sighed.
I would dearly love to talk to you longer, Miss Combes, but I have a supper to prepare.
If you and your werewolf friend would be so kind as to call at 311 Fairfax Drive at 7, I would be most obliged.
And Ruth would be very glad to see you.
My eyes widened.
Where is she? What have you done with her? He chuckled. Nothing, but if you don't come, I may be forced to do something else. We'll see you at 7.
Goodbye. Click. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at the ground. Mad thoughts of danger and Ruth swirled in my head. David grasped my shoulders and caught my gaze.
What is it? What's happened? I swallowed the lump in my throat and fought back tears. He's got her.
I don't know how, but he's got her at his house and he wants us to come too.
Tonight at 7. The doctor clucked his tongue and shook his head. Sounds like a trap if I ever saw one. What's the address? 311 Fairfax Drive, I replied.
David and Ficus glanced at each other.
I frowned. What is it?
David pursed his lips.
We might need you to come along with us, Doc.
Ficus gave a nod.
Let me get my stuff and I'll go with you now. He turned away and disappeared into the depths of the house.
I glared at David.
What's with you two? What's wrong with that address?
David sighed and turned to me. Do you remember how Blake told us his island was a focal point for the strange? I nodded.
Yeah, why? He folded his arms. The house that stands at the address you gave isn't much better than Blake's Island, but for ghosts.
In fact, it might be the worst place for us to go, if we're going to confront this phantom. Spirits have the upper hand in the halls of Fairfax House.
How? I asked him.
He leaned against the doorframe and shrugged.
I'm not quite sure about the mechanics. You should ask the doc about that.
He glanced over his shoulder, and in the direction where the doc had disappeared.
Where is that old man anyway? Don't call me old, and I'm right here, Ficus replied as he hurried from a hall on the left.
He had a carpet bag in one hand, and a black overcoat in exchange for his white one.
Atop his head was a barbershop hat. I'm as ready as I'll ever be.
I glanced from one man to the other. Could somebody please explain to me the dangers so I can know how much to panic? David pushed the doctor out of the house and guided us down the path to the limo.
How about we discuss this somewhere more comfortable?
Ficus glared at him.
If you wish, but stop shoving me about. I'm not a chew toy.
David grinned at him.
I might reconsider that if you don't hurry.
We reached the limo, and Pure opened the door for us. To Fairfax House, my good man, and don't spare the horses. Pure's face paled, and he slammed the door shut before we could get inside.
Fairfax House, sir.
David frowned at his servant.
You heard me, Pure, and we're in a hurry.
Pure cleared his throat.
Pardon my boldness, sir, but isn't that a house of ill repute?
And deadly spirits, one of which we have to exorcise, but first we need to drive there, David persisted. Pure stretched to his full height and held his chin high.
Then I would like to request that I accompany you on this adventure.
David arched an eyebrow.
You won't be of much use in there, Pure.
You're better off as our getaway driver. Pure nodded at me.
If you'll pardon me again, sir, but Miss Combes won't be of much use in such a place either. I crossed my arms and glared at him. I'm not being left behind.
Pure bowed his head.
Nor am I, Miss Combes.
David set his hand on Pure's shoulder and looked into the middle-aged man's eyes.
I need you, Pure.
Nobody else would be foolish enough to drive a werewolf around town.
And I need you, sir.
No one else can sign my paycheck, Pure quipped. David smiled and patted Pure on the shoulder.
All right, you win, but don't say I didn't warn you.
Pew bowed his head and opened the door.
I will be careful not to, sir.
We slipped into the rear seat of the limo, and the car pulled away from the house.
I turned to my mate and arched an eyebrow. How far away is this house? He shrugged. I'd say about an hour's drive. I glanced at my watch. Wouldn't that get us at the place 2 hours before time? He smiled. Yes, but I'm sure our host won't mind us arriving early, particularly since it might take us some time to find our rooms. So can you tell me about this mysterious house of ill repute? I asked him.
David glanced at the doctor.
We're comfortable, Doc, so you can tell Dakota about the house. You know more about it than me.
Ficus set his bag between his legs and sank into his cushioned seat.
Not much to tell, really. The hauntings started after the original owner's wife, a mentally unstable creature, burned half the house down.
Both of them died in the fire.
The place was rebuilt, but their ghosts were fixed to the land. He waved his hand. Then there came a string of murders, suicides, unexplained disappearances, and strange odors of decay.
I cringed.
Sounds wonderful.
So what does this Doug Phantom have in store for us?
The doctor shrugged. The Phantom probably wishes to do away with us, in the bowels of the house.
David draped his arm across my shoulders and smiled at us.
Sounds like fun, doesn't it?
I plucked his hand off my shoulder and tossed it back at him.
Loads.
So how do we survive this funhouse? David nodded at the bag between the doctor's feet.
That is our trump card.
Ficus wagged his finger at David.
Don't go relying too much on my tricks.
I'm a doctor, not a miracle worker. You'll have to rely on some of your own strengths to get us out of any physical situations. I waved my finger between them.
So how long have you guys known each other anyway?
Ficus leaned back and pursed his lips.
Sometimes I think it's too long.
David chuckled.
Only a few years.
The good doctor assisted me in some trouble a while back. Ficus scoffed. Assisted isn't the word I'd use.
I found you half transformed in a filthy alley with a half-dozen police cars on your tail.
He wagged his finger again.
You were just fortunate I had my bag with me that night, or I would have abandoned you to your folly. It was an honest mistake, David insisted. An honest mistake, you had a lion's claw halfway through your arm.
Ficus retorted. David held up his hands and smiled.
All right, Doc, you win.
I was a foolish young werewolf out for a meal at the local zoo, and should have known better than to tangle with a whole pride of lions. Ficus pursed his lips.
We're all rather unfortunate it was your arm that was hurt, and not your tongue.
David shrugged.
Sometimes the cat gets it, Doc, and sometimes it doesn't.
I rolled my eyes. Kids, could we stay on the topic of our deaths and not past attempts at suicide? David leaned against my side and smiled.
You're in better hands than you know, my dear mate. Nothing will happen to you so long as we're around.
Those were famous last words that karma would later prove wrong. 7. The car ride led us across the Cam River and past the eastern portions of the city. We traveled into the wilderness of the Bay Road that wound its way through thick forests of old-growth trees. Weed-choked driveways on either side of us were shadowed by the heavy canopy of those trees, and wound their way to rusted wrought-iron gates. Stately mansions overgrown with ivy and brush leaned out of the brush, silent sentinels to the glories of old families long past their prime. I leaned forward and glanced out the window.
Cheery places. And our destination is the most cheerful, David spoke up.
Pew turned us onto one of those driveways. The way was little more than a wide path of weeds and dirt. The property was too overgrown to see the house from the road. Brush and tree branches scraped the side of the car. Their long, sharp, dead fingers scratched at the windows, and the shadows behind their thick boughs beckoned to us. It was still afternoon, but in this dark forest, night was forever. David flinched.
There goes the paint job.
Ficus picked up his bag and set it in his lap. His lips were pursed as he stared out the window.
You won't have to worry about the car if we don't succeed.
David smiled.
Comforting, Doc.
Very comforting.
He shrugged. Just stating the plain facts.
We're up against a phantom that's tasted human soul, and it's not about to let us leave without a bite. David grinned and his sharp teeth glistened in the dim overhead light.
That's okay. I have a bit of a bite, myself.
The winding driveway took us to a pair of tall iron gates.
On either side of rose a stone wall 10 feet tall.
Pure parked the car and shut off the engine. He opened the door, and we stepped out. Beyond the gate stood Fairfax House. The structure was made in the style of a large country manor. Its lofty 3 floors bowed under a full attic, and the exterior was a mix of wood and rounded stones. Tall narrow windows glared down at us, and many were covered by the tattered remains of curtains. A wide gravel walk led from the gates to the inset front doors. The large wooden entrances were like a gaping mouth, ready to swallow fiend and foe alike. All the windows were dark, or so I thought. Ficus pointed at one in the west wing of the 3rd floor.
There.
David and I followed his finger. A flickering light shimmered through the thin glass.
Then it disappeared.
David turned to we 3 with a smile.
It seems our arrival didn't go unnoticed.
Pure bowed his head.
I'm sorry, sir, but I didn't feel comfortable shutting the headlights off.
David raised his hand and shook his head.
It's all right, Pure, we understand.
To be honest, I'd be grateful for a whole forest of torches. Ficus dropped his carpet bag onto the ground and opened the awning mouth. He rummaged for a second before he pulled out 2 large flashlights.
What about the electrical kind?
David smiled and took one of them.
Even better.
Ficus handed each of us a flashlight. I leaned forward to catch sight of what other surprises he held in that bag, but there was only darkness.
He shut the bag and picked it up. Shall I lead the way, sir?
Pure offered. David clicked on his flashlight and shook his head.
No.
Dakota and I were especially invited, so we should lead.
He turned to me and offered me his arm. Shall we?
I pursed my lips but accepted his arm.
I hope you have a plan other than knocking on the door. He chuckled. No, but I'll think of something.
David turned away and shone the flashlight over the gates. I started back when a groan came from the ancient hinges, and the gates slowly swung inward to allow us passage.
Looks like the spook doesn't mind an early visit, Ficus spoke up. And we shouldn't disappoint it, David added.
David led our little group up the gravel path and to the doors. Those ancient portals, too, opened of their own accord and revealed the hidden world beyond the crumbling walls. The entrance hall was a burial shroud of furniture, covered in white sheets. The wooden floors were encased in a thick layer of dirt and dried leaves hardened by years of neglect. We stepped inside and found ourselves in the shadow of a mighty chandelier.
Roomy, I spoke up.
I winced when my voice echoed through the many halls of the manor. David smiled.
It seems we didn't give our host time to clean up before our coming.
Ficus dropped his bag on the ground and knelt in front of it to rummage in its dark depths.
But you two and your yapping are giving it plenty of opportunity to greet us.
David swept his hands towards the grand staircase that curled around the rear wall of the hall.
After you, my good doctor.
Ficus pulled out a 2-foot-long stick with short branches on either side, and a few green leaves stuck at the end of those branches.
I will, if you'd give me a moment to find it, he replied as he stood.
David arched an eyebrow.
You saw the light. We should go there.
Ficus raised the stick above his head and turned in a circle.
Don't believe anything you see in here.
Use your nose instead, and tell me where you smell the worst stench in this place. David lifted his nose and took a couple of whiffs.
He frowned. It's coming from the 2nd floor near... Ficus jerked to a stop with the stick pointed at the right-hand wing of the house. Near the back of the house and at the end of the hall, Ficus finished for him.
David chuckled.
Perhaps you should be the one to lead.
Ficus picked up his bag in one hand and clutched the stick in another.
Perhaps I should.
Now all of you play follow the leader and stay close. Ficus led us up the curved stairs. David and I walked side by side, and Pure brought up the rear. I glanced at my mate and jerked my head towards Ficus's back.
What kind of a quack is this guy? I whispered. The best at what he does, David assured me.
Ficus glanced over his shoulder and nodded.
You're darn right.
Not every doctor can heal the physical and spiritual.
I arched an eyebrow. How do you deal with the spiritual?
He rattled his carpet bag.
With this and this. He tapped his temple with the end of his stick. I frowned and squinted my eyes at the stick. I think your leaves are dying.
The greenery hung limp from the branches. Ficus held the stick in front of him and nodded.
They should.
This is a branch of hawthorn. The leaves go limp in the direction of supernatural beings, and they wither when drawn close enough to them.
Do you have anything that can help us exorcise this phantom, Doc?
David spoke up. Ficus snorted. If I didn't, I would have received my price for the holy water and sent you on your way. As it is, I have a little experiment I'd like to try on your phantom friend.
Care to clue us in?
David persisted. Ficus shook his head.
Not here.
The walls have ears. We reached the landing to the second floor. A long hall stretched to the left and right. The far ends were encased in shadows so deep our flashlights couldn't penetrate the darkness. Doors stood on either side of the hall. The soiled wallpaper was covered in cobweb-draped portraits. I glared at a particularly menacing portrait of a man in gentleman's attire from 2 centuries before.
They have eyes too.
Ficus paused and frowned at a portrait of a woman close to his right. She wore a prim and proper frown of her own on her face.
That was probably because of the tight, high collar that adorned her thin, seated form. I wouldn't be surprised at anything.
David wrapped one arm around my shoulders and moved us past Ficus and down the hall some 10 feet.
Be firm, my brave companions.
We have only a short hallway, a simple battle, and a damsel rescued before we leave.
This should all be done in 5 minutes. That's when the floor beneath me gave way.
8. The boards beneath my feet cracked and yawned, sucking me down into darkness. David's arm couldn't cling to me as hard as gravity forced me down. I let out my best terrified scream as I fell through the floor. The next one didn't break my fall, but a sharp, bony object covered in cloth finished my fun with gravity. A dust cloud fell over me and forced air from my lungs. I choked on the ancient dirt and waved my hand in front of me to clear my vision. A loud crash and crunch beside me started me backwards into more dust. A shadowy figure emerged from the cloud and loomed over me.
Are you okay?
David asked me. I grasped my chest over my heart and glared at my mate who stood over me.
Did you really have to follow me down here that way?
He knelt beside me and helped me sit up.
I thought if it was good enough for you, it would be good enough for me. It needs some work, I quipped. I glanced around us. Where are we anyway?
David mimicked my action and frowned.
He swept his light over the area.
I glimpsed stone walls and chink mud between them.
It looks like the basement. Sir.
Pure shouted.
Should we assume you two are all right with all your jabbering?
Ficus called down to us.
We're fine.
David called back.
I shifted and winced. Mostly fine. I dug something sharp from my rear and held it up.
My flashlight was gone, but David shone his light on what I held. My eyes widened as I realized it was a broken human leg bone. I yelped and tossed the bone. It clattered into the darkness. David pointed his flashlight at the ground beneath me. His eyes widened, and he held out his hand to me.
You might want to get up, he advised me. I blinked at him. Why? That's when I decided to turn around.
The sharp, bony, cloth-covered floor beneath me was one vast swath of skeletal bodies. They were stacked one on top of another, to create a grisly game of doggy pile. I yelped and leapt into David's outstretched arm. He lifted me off the pile, and pulled me to a clear spot on the floor.
What's the matter?
Ficus yelled at us. David pursed his lips as his eyes swept over the dozens and dozens of bones.
We seem to have hit upon a rather grisly treasure, Doc. There are skeletons down here.
Skeletons? What kind?
The human kind. Sir.
Pure exclaimed. Ficus's voice sounded strained.
Just stay there. We'll come to you.
Something moved in the pile. My pulse quickened as I watched a lump rise from the mix of cloth and bone. The thing was covered in the ragged remains of the clothes of the dead, and resembled a great hunchbacked figure in a filthy hood and cloak.
It raised its head and a pair of gleaming red eyes glared at us.
David backed up with me firmly against his side.
Actually, Doc, we'd rather come to you. It'll be faster the other way.
Ficus insisted. Believe me, you don't want to be down here, David warned him.
The creature shambled through the bones. It stretched out its arms and revealed two bony limbs that ended in toe joints.
Its arms were strung from knees, and the movement of the cloth revealed legs formed from rib bones stuck to one another to create thick limbs. I clung to David as we backed up, and the thing shambled forward.
What is that?
David shook his head.
I don't know, and I don't think we want to find out.
He tilted his head back and looked at the hole in the ceiling.
The hole was 10 feet above us, and another 20 feet to the second floor where we could see the faces of our comrades.
He looked to me with a grim expression as he handed me his flashlight.
Hold on as tight as you can. This is going to be a bumpy ride.
I wrapped my arms around his neck and nodded.
Ready.
He clutched me to himself and took a deep breath.
Then he ran at the creature. What are you doing?
I screamed. The dark eyes blazed with evil, and it swung one of its deadly clawed hands. David ducked the blow and leapt onto the thing's head.
A high-pitched shriek spewed from beneath its hood.
David jumped upward from its head and cleared the first hole.
The creature snatched at his ankles but missed. It raised its arms above its head and gave another high-pitched cry. Our friends above us leaned back and their eyes widened. What in all that is holy is that?
Pure asked us. Ficus leaned forward over the hole and waved at David.
Quick! Up here!
David turned us so we faced the hole, and the thing inside its great mawing mouth.
What's the hurry, Doc? It can't get up here. The creature howled again and stretched out its arms.
The bones beneath its feet climbed up its body like an army of white ants and connected themselves to the arms. The extended limbs grasped the edge of the hole and pulled the rest of the body off the ground and towards the first floor. And us. David stumbled back with me still safely in his unsafe arms.
Sir.
Pure yelped. Ficus shone his flashlight on the creature's red eyes. The thing screeched and shielded its eyes, but nothing stopped its terrible march. Ficus whipped his head to Pure.
Don't sit there blabbering. Shine your light on it.
Pure swallowed and nodded. They both flashed their flashlight beams on the creature. The bones on the arms sizzled and steam rose from their white surfaces. The thing cried out, and its fingers slipped a few inches off the edge. Ficus looked to David.
Hurry. Coming.
David replied. My mate rushed up the stairs on our left, just as the creature's body reached the hole. I looked over his shoulder and shuddered. Those terrible eyes glared at us with a murderous intent. It climbed out of the hole and slithered across the floor, following our footsteps as we rushed up the steps. We reached the second floor and met our friends near the hole. David set me down and glanced at his medical friend.
What is that thing?
David asked the doc. Ficus knelt on the ground and furiously rifled through the contents.
The bodies of those poor souls who were killed by the evil in this house. Shouldn't they hate the house and like us?
I pointed out.
He shook his head. They're jealous of the living and wish for us to join them in their torment.
Pure glanced from his master to the dock.
Is there nothing that can be done to free such pitiful creatures?
Ficus lifted his head and glared at Pure.
Start worrying about yourself. These things don't mean to hug us.
David pulled out the vial of holy water.
Will this holy water help?
A loud deep chuckle startled us. We whipped our heads to the stairway. The rotten thing reached the landing and blocked the hall with its decrepit corpse. A figure appeared beside it.
It was Gardy.
A wide crooked grin adorned his face. He leaned his side against the creature and bowed his head to us.
Good afternoon, my early guests, he greeted us.
David pulled me behind him and growled at the phantom thing. Gardy chuckled again.
Is that any way to treat your host? And I had such plans for you.
David tensed.
Pity. We were just leaving.
Gardy glanced up at the stench-ridden bony thing beside him.
Oh, I don't think so. You see, my friends here love guests.
They love them to death, if you'll pardon the pun. They would dearly love for you to stay.
Aha! The cry of joy came from Ficus.
He pulled out a square metal box with pictures of animals on the four sides. There was a crank on one side, which he cranked around and around. Gardy's eyes widened before they narrowed. He curled his lips back in a snarl.
What are you doing there, human?
Ficus chuckled.
Just a little surprise.
A small musical sound emitted from the box. Gardy whipped his head up to the rotten corpse and jerked his head towards us.
Destroy them. The corpse dragged its body towards us.
Its elongated arms stretched out and threatened to wrap its bony fingers around our necks. We backed up, but the hole blocked our escape path.
Doc, if you've got something planned, you'd better do it now, David hissed at him.
Ficus pumped the handle faster and faster. A maniacal glint slipped into his eyes as the music sang faster and faster.
Get ready, he yelled at us. Ready for what? I asked him. This.
He stopped his grinding and tossed the box. The box flew in an arc and clattered to the ground at the feet of our rotten foe. Both Gardy and it glanced down just in time to see the metal lid to spring open. A jack-in-the-box toy doll sprang from the box and waved its tiny hands and head at them. The pair startled back and drew into the shadows beyond from the stair landing. Ficus picked up his bag and whipped his head to us.
Run, you fools.
David swept me into his arms, but I pulled on the collar of his shirt like it was a pair of reins.
Not without Ruth.
I insisted.
All right, but you're not coming with me, he replied.
David dropped me into Pure's unwilling and unprepared arms. I was nearly dropped to the floor, but the old servant held me up long enough for me to set my feet on the boards. David turned and leapt across the gaping hole to the other side of the hallway.
What the hell are you doing? I shouted at him.
He paused and glanced over his shoulder to flash me a winning grin.
Meet us outside on the side of the house. He glanced at Pure. Keep care of her.
Pure pursed his lips but nodded. David turned and rushed into the darkness that lay at the end of the hall.
I started for him, but Pure grabbed my hand. We must leave, he insisted.
I whipped my head around and glared at him.
We can't leave him. He smiled at me. Have faith in Mr. Dives and let us hurry. He dislikes late appointments. I frowned but let Pure lead me down the stairs.
9. What remained of our party fled down the grand staircase and to the first floor. We swept across the leaf-covered hall and rushed to the open doors.
That's when they slammed in our faces.
We slammed into them and tugged at the handles. They weren't budging. Did you think a little parlor trick would free you from me? A voice spoke up. We whipped around to find Gardy striding down the stairs. Behind him shuffled his bony pet. He reached the bottom of the stairs and set his arm atop the end of the banister. His dark eyes fell on Ficus.
It's not every human who knows ghosts dislike surprises. How did you find out such a secret?
Ficus smirked.
We'll call it tricks of the trade.
Gardy chuckled.
Perhaps it is, but I'll wager you are running out.
Ficus popped open the clasp of his carpet bag and the top parted.
Care to try out your theory?
Gardy turned his eyes down at the hole. A dark rope of bones flew out of the opening and stretched itself towards us. A bony hand lay at the end of the rope and grasped Ficus's bag.
It tore the parcel from his hands and slipped back into the darkness from whence it came.
Gardy tilted his head back and laughed.
Now say you, my friend. What can you do without your bag?
Ficus narrowed his eyes and stalked towards the pair. I reached out for him, but Pure held me back. I whipped my head around and glared at the servant.
What are you doing? He's going to get himself killed.
Pure smiled.
Have faith in Mr. Ficus as well.
I pursed my lips, but returned my attention to Ficus. He pulled up his sleeves and stopped 10 feet from our foes.
You would have been better off to leave me with my bag.
Gardy chuckled.
And why is that?
Ficus grasped his hands together, so they were mirrors of each other like the yin-yang symbol. A strange light emanated from between his hands and cast shadows over his face. His smirk slipped back onto his lips as the light brightened. Because I'm more dangerous without it. Gardy stumbled back and raised his arm over his face to shield his eyes. His teeth were clenched together, and he grasped the banister tight in one hand.
What are you doing?
Ficus chuckled.
Just a little magic. Now watch the birdie.
Ficus pulled apart his hands. The light burst forth and exploded into a million tiny glowing blue birds. They flew at our shadow foes like a focused ocean wave, and attached themselves to their clothing. The tiny birds wrapped their bodies around the bones of the creature, and the body of Gardy. Then one by one they started to explode. These weren't large explosions, but they were brilliant bursts of blue light. Every blast blew apart the bone to which they were attached. The death creature screeched in pain and fell back onto the stairs. Pure grasped my arm and pointed at the bony creature.
Look.
I didn't need his finger to show me the small white clouds of mist that floated from the bony body every time a bone blew to pieces.
The creature writhed and screamed.
The cloth that covered it was pushed off by the clouds of mist and revealed a black skeleton beneath the armor of miscellaneous bone parts. Its empty sockets contained a pair of red eyes that glared back at us. Gardy caught our attention as he screamed and flailed around. He slapped his arms and face and clawed at the little translucent birds, but they wouldn't come off. Those lights too burst, but his body didn't crumble. Instead, a thick mess of black smog was pulled from the flesh piece by piece, until a whole shadowy form was transposed over Gardy's body. The shadowy creature had the same red eyes as the skeleton thing. Ficus leaned back and sucked in air. He leaned forward and blew. The smog form was separated from Gardy and pushed backwards into the black skeleton. The smog creature disappeared into the skeleton. Gardy's eyes rolled back and he collapsed to the floor. The skeleton climbed onto its body feet. The miscellaneous bones fell away, and it was left with only a few bits of sparse rotten clothing.
The creature took a step forward and shook one of its bony fists at Ficus. Damn you, sorcerer. I'll make you pay for destroying my souls.
Ficus scoffed at him.
They weren't your souls to begin with, demon, and as for paying, my bill is too expensive.
He clutched his hands as before, and another blue light appeared from his hands. The skeleton's red eyes widened and brightened.
It turned tailbone and raced up the stairs.
Ficus opened his hands. A large brilliant blue butterfly flew from his palms and fluttered after our foe.
Its huge wings were 5 feet long and its antenna 2 feet tall.
The details were that of a monarch, and its majesty stayed true to that name as it floated up the stairs. It caught the skeleton halfway up the flight, and enveloped the bones in its wide wings. The skeleton let out one final, high-pitched scream as the butterfly released its energy. The light was so strong that Pure and I averted our eyes. When the light faded, we looked back at the stairs. A fine sprinkling of black powder drifted onto the stairs. I glanced up at the ceiling looking for its light, like the other destroyed bone.
Where'd it go?
Ficus chuckled and pointed a finger at the floor.
A place different than those poor souls. The door behind us burst open.
We spun around and watched David fly into the room, partially transformed, and prepared for a battle that was very much over. He blinked at us and looked past our little group at the pile of ash and Gardy's limp body.
Did I miss much? He asked me.
I walked over to him and rapped him upside the head. He winced and rubbed the sore spot.
What was that for? For being late. I snapped. Where the hell were you, anyway? I dropped something during the transformation, and it took me a few moments to find it, he admitted.
He glanced at Ficus and arched an eyebrow.
Are all of the souls gone?
Ficus jerked his head over his shoulder.
Sniff for yourself.
David lifted his long snout and sniffed the air.
I don't smell anything except must and cobwebs.
Ficus strode over to the stairs and picked up his bag the skeleton creature dropped. He brushed the dust off the carpet sides and turned to us.
You can expect my bill will be quite large, especially as I consider this a house call.
David smiled and bowed his head.
Of course, my dear doctor.
My eyes widened and I grasped David's arm.
Ruth. Is she? He set his hand on mine and nodded. She's fine. I left her outside near the car, he assured me.
My shoulders slumped and I ran a hand through my hair.
Finally, some good news.
Pure stepped up to us and bowed.
I am sorry I couldn't be of more help, sir.
David chuckled and patted Pure's shoulder.
You were a great help, Pure.
Without you, who knows what Dakota would have done. I whipped my head up and glared at him.
What's that supposed to mean? He stepped back and held his hands up in front of him. Nothing important.
Ficus strode past us and paused in the doorway to half turn to our little group.
If you people are done patting each other on the back, I would like to go home now.
He nodded at Gardy's limp form.
And could somebody pick that fool up and bring him with us? This is no place for the living. I frowned. Shouldn't he feel right at home here?
Ficus shook his head.
Not anymore.
The phantom has been exorcised, and he's as human as any of us. His eyes flickered to David.
Generally speaking, of course.
David hefted Gardy's body over one shoulder, and we left that dark house.
Our time in the manor house was long enough that the sun was setting in the west.
We returned to the car and found Ruth seated in the back.
She was fast asleep.
I reached out to her, but David, now human once again, grabbed my wrist and shook his head.
Best let her sleep.
Hopefully she didn't see anything, and if she did, she will think it was a dream.
I frowned and took a seat close beside her. I wish I knew what we saw.
Pure got the car started and turned around, so we bounced down the long driveway. David furrowed his brow and glanced at Ficus.
What did happen in there while I was rescuing a damsel in distress?
Ficus leaned back and shrugged.
Nothing important. I snorted.
You had blue butterflies and birds flying out of your hands. A sly smile slipped onto David's lips.
Then the good doctor had to prove his chops to the lowly skeleton.
Ficus frowned. His bag lay in his lap, and he scooted it closer to his chest.
That damned idiot stole my bag. I had no choice.
I glanced from one male to the other.
Mind filling me in on the details?
David nodded at Ficus, who turned his face away.
Our good doctor here is not only a top-rate physician, but he happens to be an expert sorcerer.
Ficus's eyes narrowed and flickered to David.
Warlock.
David bowed his head.
I sit corrected.
He's a warlock, and a very good one.
Not many could have outmatched the evil in that house. You mean the skeleton or the phantom? I asked him. They were one and the same, Ficus revealed. I blinked at him. Come again.
Ficus sighed.
The black skeleton beneath the bodies of the trapped souls was the original body of the phantom.
I merely freed the souls that protected its body, reinserted its own black soul into its body, and destroyed that. David clapped his hands.
Bravo, Doc. It's so simple and yet so magnificent.
I grabbed his hands and put a finger to my lips.
Ruth. I hissed.
He lowered his hands and sheepishly grinned.
Sorry, but I had to admire the doctor's simple approach to a very complicated problem.
Ficus scoffed. Generally, the more complicated the appearance of the problem, the easier it is to resolve. David tapped the limp body on the floor of the limo. The man known as Gardy groaned but didn't awaken.
And what about this problem? Is it resolved? The doctor nodded. It is.
He will remember his time as one possessed, but may not agree with the decisions and only wonder why he made those choices. I winced.
So he might not like Ruth. That may be, Ficus replied.
David wrapped his arm around my shoulders and grinned at the doctor.
So what do you think, Doc?
Should we make Fairfax House our vacation home? Ficus closed his eyes and shook his head.
No, nor would I advise that you two ever return there.
David arched an eyebrow.
Why not? You destroyed the phantom.
I destroyed a phantom, but that house holds more dark secrets than Shades of the Dead, Ficus warned us. David frowned.
But I didn't smell anything.
Ficus leaned back so he was enveloped in dark shadows.
The house didn't want any more trouble today.
He glanced out the windows as we passed from the shadows of the forest and onto the busier paved road.
I wouldn't be surprised if all that was damaged was already fixed and the evil stench of that place revived.
10. The soft lights of the city shone ahead of us, and the lights in the stately mansions along either side of the road reminded us we were back in the human world. Well, most of us.
I glanced at the doctor. So where did you learn how to do all that magic?
Ficus looked to me with a smile.
Night school. I arched an eyebrow. Seriously? He shrugged. And a few personal lessons here and there.
David laughed.
Don't try too hard to get that information out of him, Dakota. I've tried for years, and those are his only answers when someone inquires.
Ficus smiled and bowed his head.
A magician must keep his secrets.
We dropped Ficus off at his home, along with a large check from David made out in the doctor's name. David slipped back into the car and glanced down at Gardy.
I must admit I'm not quite sure what to do with him.
A sly idea slipped into my mind, and I jerked my head towards Ruth.
Why don't we leave the two lovebirds together?
David grinned.
And leave us alone.
I rolled my eyes.
And leave us time to get some food and collapse. I slumped in the seat and sighed. I'm exhausted, and because of you, tomorrow's probably going to be a nightmare. He arched an eyebrow. Because of me? What do you mean?
I tilted my head in his direction.
Remember that exit you gave me from work? He nodded. Well, my boss and all my co-workers are probably going to torture me about it.
It isn't hard, but you made Buller look like a fool, and he won't let me forget it.
He shrugged. That's easily remedied. I frowned. How?
He leaned close so our lips brushed against each other. My cheeks flushed with heat. His sultry voice tempted my better instincts.
We could help each other.
I can deal with your employment problem, and you can help me save face in front of the doctor. I leaned back and raised an eyebrow.
Come again.
He cupped one of my hot cheeks in his palm and studied my face with gentle eyes.
You could consent to be my wife.
My eyes widened.
You're Thought you were serious about that.
David chuckled.
Am I not always serious?
I rolled my eyes.
Only when. He leaned down and pressed our lips together in a long, passionate kiss.
When we broke apart, I gasped for air.
Only when that happens. Then you know how serious is my proposal, he pointed out.
I pursed my lips and studied his expression.
You're not doing this just because your werewolf self wants it, are you? Would that matter, he wondered. I shrugged. I'm a woman, so I'm complicated.
I'd like to think there's more than just carnal desire to our relationship.
He smiled. Well, let's just say we will be spouses with benefits.
He leaned away from me and clasped my hands in both of his. Our eyes met. His voice lowered, as did he, right onto the floor in front of me and on one knee. He pulled out a small container from one of his torn pockets, and opened it so I could see the large diamond ring nestled in its interior. Dakota Combes, my mate in both beast and soul, we haven't known each other very long, but will you be my wife? I blinked at the case.
There was a bit of dirt and dried bits of leaves stuck to the exterior. This is what you lost in transforming, wasn't it? He sheepishly grinned. It was, but what do you say?
Do you believe you can survive without having your wonderful job? I smiled, leaned down and pecked a kiss on his lips.
What do you think?
He plucked the ring from its velvet cushion and slipped it onto my finger.
I think this is the beginning of a beautiful relationship.